Hey everyone, it's Rob and welcome to the pod. I'm so grateful you've joined me today for our Leading with Genuine Care series of podcasts. Today we have on Julianna Raye for a really heartfelt and vulnerable conversation and quite an educational conversation. A little bit about Julianna. She's CEO and lead content developer and head trainer at UnifiedMindfulness.com. She's devoted to deepening people's understanding of research-supported mindfulness and empowering anyone to guide others in its practice. She's trained individuals, groups, and organizations in the practice of mindfulness for 2 decades, and she developed the official training program for the Unified Mindfulness system, which was designed by Shai-Zen Young, a Zen practitioner and teacher. She's done more than 150 weeks of silent retreat training, both in mindfulness and Zen traditions. 20,000 hours of formal practice, and we're going to hear a bit about how that has really showed up over the past 90 plus days, as this is recorded on June 30th, 2020, and we are experiencing a global pandemic. And so we're going to hear how that's worked out for her, in other words, her practice. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy a truly remarkable conversation with Julianna. Hi, Julianna. Thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be
From
here.
Los Angeles, how are things out there?
Things are good. We're spiking right now with the virus, and so everyone's being very conscientious for the most part out in public and wearing masks. And we're hoping that our hospitals are able to handle whatever happens right now.
Mm-hmm. It's June 30th, 2020. And we were talking just briefly before we hit record, and you said it's sort of a surreal time in our lives. How has your meditation practice helped you during this surreal time in our life? Or has it?
It definitely has. I mean, I guess there is so many ways to answer that. I guess I would say that one hallmark of a strong practice is that you're less and less reliant on externals to define your sense of groundedness or define your quote unquote reality. And the value of that is when things get surreal externally, as they are for all of us in the pandemic right now, you have an unchanging resource that reminds you that you are not at the mercy of externals. And of course, sometimes we're unable to remember that we have that resource. Mm-hmm. But one way to think about mindfulness is that it is the constant remembrance of this resource that is always available to us, that reminds us that we are not imprisoned by our external conditions. Mm-hmm. One way to think about it. So we forget and we keep reminding ourselves, and that's why we call it a practice, because it is a re-engineering of our knowing and connecting with this inner resource. It's a interrupting of the pattern of forgetfulness, where we place too much value on the externals to define us. And so.
Mm-hmm. And you're at a place where that happens, Los Angeles area. There's a lot of that out there, but of course, in many places of the world, it's such a simple thing to say. Why is it so hard?
You know, it's funny because people, of course, look at Los Angeles as all about the externals, right? The entertainment business, but also there's a freedom here, a creative freedom that, you know, this town draws people also who never felt like they fit in.
Mm.
So there's a non-adherence to traditional ways of life, for instance, in a town like this. So I would say that we all, each in our own way, are trapped in our own in a lens that we see the world through, and that lens is just our the perspective of our this particular form that we're taking, this particular person, and you know how we grew up, and you know what our genetics are, you know, and all the whole host of variables that forms this human impression of you know, self and world. And that's incredibly useful. In other words, we need to know where we're located in space. We need to know what time it is in order to get around in the world, do things, go from here to there. But there is two ways to think about it. There's a prioritization of that, of I'm oriented in this position in space at this time, that is much higher than it needs to be in terms of value. We overvalue because we're habituated to do that. We overvalue these aspects of ourselves that are meant to orient ourselves so we don't like bump into things and hurt ourselves. We overvalue that, and we undervalue the aspects of ourselves that are what I talked about earlier, the connectivity that is there, that runs through all experience and through all human caring, let's say. And we just keep sort of overvaluing this orientation of I'm here and you're over there. And we keep undervaluing, oh wait, yes, there's this connectivity that's there regardless, and that's through everything. And that, I think that happens because we don't have resources to teach us otherwise, and we aren't introduced to those resources early on. So we don't have a practice, something that shows us, and we get early on habituated. We get early on sort of indoctrinated in, you know, this orientation. And we kind of, you look, animals do it, right? I mean, we're animals. We fight, flight, freeze. That's how you got to make sure there's nothing going to kill you around here, right? No tiger's going to strike. And so in a way, we kind of haven't grown up beyond that way of being in the world. And so we're taking a deep dive here. Hope this isn't too surreal for
Not at all. Not at all. Okay. A friend of mine, Dr. Thumpton Jimpa, and I were speaking recently, and he mentioned a New York Times article headline that kind of caught his eye. And it was at the beginning of this COVID crisis pandemic, and it said the Great Reset. And I bring that up because is this a time where we can maybe do a reset, each one of us personally, and lead with more genuine care? You mentioned connectedness. How can we realize that we are truly so interconnected to one another as we walk down the street and see strangers, just knowing that that little bit of genuine care can make a big difference in the world?
Yeah. That's the question. And I think, you know, I have one way that I can answer it for your audience, and people are going to have a lot of different ways. I think ultimately we're all talking about the same thing. The way I like to talk about it, because I think that it's empowering to talk about it this way, is that there is a practice we can do. We can develop a set of attention skills. We can develop our attention in particular ways and learn how to redirect our attention to what is most salient, and also learn how to see through our misguided notions of the nature of quote unquote reality. Our misunderstandings, our surface misunderstandings, we can start to get deeper just by detecting what is truly there. So we're not doing anything, we're not discovering anything that wasn't ever there. It's always been there. It's just that, as I mentioned earlier, there's this habit of prioritization. There's this habit of where we tend to look, and we need to break the spell of that. So this practice, mindfulness, the way Unified Mindfulness likes to frame it is as a set of attention skills that you're developing, very specific attention skills. And the reason I like to offer that is because, it demystifies this process of breaking that spell. It demystifies this process of how we actually begin to walk down the street, being able to tap into that connectedness and not being so preoccupied with the separateness. Mm-hmm. So once you understand, okay, there are these skills I can develop, we call them concentration, sensory clarity, and equanimity. Once you understand, oh, there are these skills I can develop and here's how I can develop them. And then it's a practice, and it's a practice I can do anytime, anywhere. I don't have to be seated in silence with my eyes closed, although that can be beneficial because you're eliminating distractions, but you don't have to be. And that can be helpful for people also to remember that there are ways that they can, intentionally apply a set of skills that will improve their sense of connectivity, potentially in the moment, but for sure in the long term. That it's a practice that accumulates and deepens and intensifies and gets richer over time.
So many people think of mindfulness, as you mentioned, sometimes it's just sitting maybe with your eyes closed or open in quiet, in silence. But you also mentioned you don't need to do that. Can you give an example of what that might look like?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, well, that's the kind of cool thing. This approach, what it does is we say, anytime you sit and with your eyes closed in silence and do what people call meditation, you're developing a set of skills. And by defining meditation as skill development, then we can disentangle the skill development from the particular position you have to be in, or you happen to be in, right? So now we're saying there's this set of skills, attention skills you're developing. It doesn't rely on you sitting in a particular position. It can be helpful, like I said, to eliminate distractions, but it doesn't rely on it. So what does it look like? It means that walking down the street, you can be focusing on an aspect of your experience or multiple aspects of your experience using these attention skills intentionally. So for instance, let's suppose I am walking down the street and I want to focus on relaxing my body as I walk. Maybe I've noticed that my shoulders tend to rise up as I'm walking, and I grip in my stomach, maybe in ways that I don't necessarily need to do, or maybe I notice that my breathing is unnecessarily contracted or what have you. So I can, as I'm walking, check in with my body and intentionally relax my shoulders, intentionally relax the belly area. So a couple things are happening as I do that. Number one, I am intentionally focusing on my body. So there's a level of concentration being developed. I'm choosing where to focus my attention. So that's one of the skills, concentration. Number two, sensory clarity is involved. I'm detecting, oh, there's some tension in my shoulders. Oh, now I'm noticing there's some tightness in my belly area, right? So sensory clarity is our ability to track and explore our experience in real time. That's one of the skills we develop as we practice. So in the example, sensory clarity is illustrated by me detecting experiences such as the tension in the shoulders or the contraction in the belly area. Then there's the skill of equanimity. The skill of equanimity is the ability to allow our experience to come and go without push or pull, meaning that we're not fighting with our experience. We're not pushing it away, but we're not getting caught up in it either. So in the example that I just cited, when I intentionally relax around the areas of tension, I'm permitting those areas of tension to spread and release. And so what I'm doing there is I'm inducing equanimity with the discomfort. We tend, when we feel discomfort, to tighten up around the discomfort. It's just a habit. And the naive idea with that is, oh, well, the body imagines that if it contains it, then it'll be less uncomfortable, because we know that when we relax, the discomfort spreads. So on some level, there's some resistance to that discomfort, that initial spread of the resistance, even though it feels better. When you think of a massage, what happens? Someone digs their finger into their thumb into your shoulder. It's painful, right? But you welcome that pain because you know that it's helping release the tension in your shoulder. So same principle here. We can actually self-massage in that sense. We can purposefully relax around a tension, allow the discomfort to momentarily spike, because we know that that ultimately helps the tension release. And that's just one example of this equanimity skill, where we're giving permission for the release of a discomfort. We're allowing it to play out. We're not fighting with it. We're not trying to contain it. We're just giving it permission to do its thing. So that's just one example. There are a million examples. You could be walking down the street and you could be noticing what you see in the environment. You could be intentionally spending a few seconds looking at the stop sign and looking at the plant and looking at the doggy walking by, and right. And you could be noticing details about each object that you perceive in your environment. I mean, really, the sky is the limit in terms of how we can choose to develop these attention skills. The key is that you really understand what the skills are, and you understand how to be intentional in developing them. And that just requires, understanding how techniques operate. We hear oftentimes like, oh, focus on your breath, that's meditating. A lot of people think focusing on your breath is meditation. That's all meditation is. And they think that because that's what they were first introduced to, maybe. And maybe they didn't enjoy focusing on their breath. So they think, oh, I can't meditate. I've tried it and it's not my thing. But again, once you understand meditation as a set of attention skills that you're developing, that also frees your understanding of what meditation is altogether. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, meditation is a 24/7 thing, because what it really is an optimizing of your, you could say, your neurophysiology, right? It's an up-leveling of the software in your brain. It's an improving of how we attend generally.
That's fantastic. You've had your brain studied, actually. And so for those that are listening and hearing some of the things you're talking about, one of the things you mentioned a little bit earlier was about maybe a little bit the lens that we are seeing things through. What's happening to our brain when we're cultivating these skills?
Yeah. Well, I am not a neuroscience researcher, although I have dear friends who are. So I would not venture. And I honestly, the answer is nobody's quite sure what exactly is happening. Although they are at a point now where there's been enough momentum around research with meditation that they are endeavoring to form hypotheses and start to make educated guesses about what's really going on when we're practicing. And I've found those educated guesses really fascinating because I find that they resonate with my experience. But I can't speak with authority about that particular aspect of our experience. My strength is in the how-to of it. Like, how do we do it? What are predictable outcomes? How can we refine our ability to do it effectively? What should we be seeing in our lives as a result of doing it? Where do we get caught? Where do we run into challenges around practice? That's really my wheelhouse. And also helping people understand how to teach it. That's I run the teacher training.
When they studied your brain, what did you learn about what was different?
Yes, sure. So they were excited to show me my brain when
Were you excited
afterwards.
to see it?
Yeah, the researcher was very friendly at the first in the first study I did, and you know, she actually showed me a comparison of the control brain. So they had these control brains that were basically same age, same handedness. In my case, because I'm left-handed, which means that your brain kind of looks different in how it's wired.
Mm-hmm.
And that, unfortunately, sadly, my left-handedness also means that my brain they can't, it's not great for research because
Huh.
it's wired differently than right-handed people. And so oftentimes I'll be excluded from research for that reason. But in this case, they had a left-handed person, same age, same health. And she showed me the comparison. And what you could see very clearly was that there were a lot more gray patches on her brain. There was a lot more white. And what that was indicating was more decay on her brain compared to mine. So mine also, that you could see that there was an area that was enlarged that they think is associated with neuroplasticity. So, and that they saw as a hallmark of meditators, that meditators tend to have this more robust area that they associate with neuroplasticity. So
Mm-hmm.
it was clear that my brain had a greater resilience and lower rate of decay than a brain that had not been practicing.
Mm. I read a quote from you. Or you said, you cannot give your gifts to the world without first taking care of yourself. And I was thinking a little bit about your journey, which I'm hoping you'll share. You came out to Los Angeles to pursue an acting and a musical career, and you found it to be quite stressful. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So yes, I came out here and I had a kind of a very unusual experience relative to most people who come out here, in that I actually early on achieved a level of success that most people strive for years and may or may never achieve. So it was quite unusual. I was here for a year, a little over a year, and I got a record deal with Warner Brothers, which is kind of unheard of, the pace of that. And but you know, prior to that deal, I actually was struggling with severe depression. I was suicidal, and I would wake up in the mornings and think about how to. I had a plan. Every morning, I would envision what I was going to do, and this went on for months. And I felt very alone with it. I certainly didn't share it with anyone. It was very private, but it came from a level of psychological pain that was all over. I mean, I don't know, nobody who has experienced severe depression can understand just how physiological it is. It is it's excruciatingly painful. And when a person thinks about ending their life, it's because they're in that much pain that they can't imagine how it's going to ever go away. So that's the level of pain that I was experiencing on a daily basis. And I had no resource at the time. I wasn't meditating. I didn't know what it was. Yet I managed to pull myself out of that particular window. And, you know, I confronted myself finally and challenged myself that to follow through if that's what I was going to do. And I, at that moment, realized that I couldn't do that to my family, and that I was going to just have to live for them in the pain. And that got me through that peak, and the pain diminished enough for me to get on with things. And then I had this opportunity come up where I got this record deal, and that gave me a sense of purpose that I latched onto. And it became my identity, this externalized sense of meaning, right? We talked at the beginning of the show about the externals. So in that case, it was, oh, I have a vocation. It's my calling. I'm a singer-songwriter. And here I've been given this opportunity and I'm supposed to reach the world with my music. And that's who I am. And that's what I was put on this earth for. And that sustained me until the point that my record deal ended and I was no longer on the label. My record had failed to have an impact from a business perspective. And so I was back to waiting tables, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And at that point, I began to see myself sinking once again into the original mindset, because so much of what had pulled me out of it was external. And that's when I thought, I can't go on like this. I can't keep it, there's something wrong with me on the inside that I keep on slipping down, and I don't know how to do anything about that thing going on the inside. And I tried psychotherapy and I had some results, but they were modest. And I knew that that wasn't going to be enough, that I was going to continue to sink back in with therapy alone. And I tried medication, which was all the rage at that point. Antidepressants were just coming on the market, and I went through every one of them and found that in my case, it just didn't go well with my physiology. So I was really trapped at a loss. I couldn't rely on medication. I couldn't rely on therapy alone. I was looking down the barrel of a gun. Literally, I could easily foresee spending a life dipping into the dark and then at some point saying, I can't do this anymore. And that's when a therapist recommended I start meditating. And I was desperate and totally skeptical. If I'm feeling this much pain, what is, at that time I did half an hour a day. What's that really going to do for me? And sure enough, honestly, it didn't do much for my first 2 years. I was still in a lot of pain. And I was trying antidepressants through that whole 2-year time when I was just learning to meditate. But a couple years in, some interesting things started to happen. And I thought, I probably need a teacher. I was worried because I was very woo-woo averse and didn't want anything, was anti-crystal, I was scared that I'm a pragmatist. I'm a pragmatist to this day, anti-woo. So I just didn't want to find a teacher that expected me to be interested in chakras, because I was never going to be interested in chakras. And so I hesitated around the teacher because I liked this meditation thing. I liked what it was doing. It was my private thing. I found it helpful. I didn't know why, but I knew I needed someone. And that's when I was introduced to Shinzen Young. And that's when my life utterly transformed.
It's, I'm always so curious about how life takes us on these journeys. And, you may be sitting there thinking, I'm on top of the world. I got this record deal with this Warner Brothers. Everybody knows that. And people are asking you, what are you up to in LA? And I have a deal with Warner Brothers, and then things don't go as expected. And you're up, you're struggling internally, and you end up meeting this wonderful teacher, and you say your life changed at that point. And what are some of the things that you think about when you say your life changed?
Yeah. There's only one thing I think about when I think about that. And that is that I learned this essential secret, which I mentioned at the beginning of the call, which is that I learned that there is an inner resource that is ever available to us. And that if we can get out from under ourselves, if we can break up the cobwebs of our brains, if we can chip through those aspects of ourselves that are rigid and unbending, then we can get to this this hidden, I'm picturing as I speak, a kind of like a hidden well in the midst of the forest. We can discover this resource, have access to this resource with greater and greater depth and consistency. And the resource reveals the richness of experience that we have been overlooking and underestimating, that was there all the time, but was obscured by our habits of mind. So, and that's it. And that's the whole journey for the rest of your life. You tap into that, and then it's a matter of continuing to chip away at whatever gets in the way of your ability to connect to that, to be that, frankly, not just connect to it, to be that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to recognize the entire world as that. So I went on my first retreat with him. And that's where I just got enough momentum to see the potential of this practice. Because until that point, you know, you don't realize how myopic your lens is. You don't realize how clouded your lens is until you get a window into a clear lens, or until the lens gets blown away altogether. And so, you know, before that time, what did meditation mean to me? It meant something I did for half an hour a day that helped me feel a little bit more grounded in my day. It was a thing, a resource that I could rely on to help me live a better life. And it was one of the things in my toolkit, meditation, that was going to help me. And, you know, so, and it seemed to help me relax a little bit, although I still had a lot of anxiety, but it seemed to do this thing for me. Then I go on this retreat, and all that changes really is the dosage. Well, the dosage and the precision. So two things changed. One is Shinzen had a level of precision about the how-to, which was very empowering for me. Number two is the dosage. I sat there on the retreat from 5 a.m. till 10 p.m, and I did this practice. And 3 days in, so that's 3 days of my life that I took. 3 days in, as a result of my momentum from this training, I had a breakthrough that changed the rest of my life. And that breakthrough was my first encounter with this inner resource. And it was very tangible. It was very not subtle at all. It was profound. It was blissful. It was deeply tranquil. There was a profound sense of emotional well-being. And in that moment, I realized, oh, I'm far more resilient. This mind body is far more resilient than I've been giving it credit for. I haven't even begun to tap the potential of this mind and body, because all I did was, for a few days, I did this training, and lo and behold, I'm having this experience that I didn't even know I was capable of having. And that means it's replicable. That means I can keep doing this training, and I will have this experience more and more often, more and more consistently. And if that happens, then I get to change how I walk around in the world. I get to change the lens that I'm looking at everything through. In fact, I get to ultimately dissolve that lens entirely. So, and that's the journey. And I won't say that I have dissolved the lens entirely, but I will say that I know that journey. I know the journey that I'm on clearly.
Yeah. Do you think that it takes some level of pain or experienced pain in our life to decide to jump and get into this sort of journey?
I hope not. Well, let's say that I think that we are all experiencing suffering on a continuum. And so I do think it's intrinsic in the human condition. But, you know, I guess maybe the question is, how bad does it need to get before you're
Right.
desperate enough to try something as crazy as this?
Your question, the way you said it's much better the way I asked it.
To be crazy like I'm crazy. Well, first of all, the good news is no one has to be crazy like I'm crazy. Once I found that, it was no turning back, and I got into immersive retreat training on the regular, and, you know, multiple times a year, and just took a deep dive and never looked back. And that's what my journey was meant to be. I was meant to serve in that way. I was meant to help people learn how to teach. That's the journey I've been on. Nobody has to do what I've done in order to get benefit from it. I know there have been studies that show even just 8 weeks of practice can have an effect on the mind. So the good news is even a little bit helps, because you're up-leveling your attention, and that can help even in the moment. Like I was describing earlier, you can practice for 5 minutes and start to appreciate, oh, gee, I never noticed that beautiful rose bush out there in my front lawn. I never fully appreciated it before, right. What have you. So it can work in the moment, and it can work cumulatively over the long term. And you do what you can do.
but in terms of needing something horrible to happen to you in order to do it, needing to feel suicidal, for instance, in order to turn towards this, I sure hope not. I sure hope, my hope is that, it's kind of like, if you saw somebody with dirty glasses on, wouldn't you want to like help them clean their glasses so that they could see better? And that's just something you wish for everybody. And it's not, the good news is this isn't really about beliefs at all. This is not at all about what I believe, what you believe. It's got nothing to do with it. It's only got to do with our direct experience through our senses.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's all we're talking about. How we pay attention reflects our experience through our senses. And if we improve the way we pay attention, we improve our capacity for experience. It gets richer. Our pleasant experience becomes more fulfilling. Unpleasant experience becomes more manageable. So this is just a practical resource for anyone and everyone. And I would hope that everybody, would like to enrich their experience of life.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that wouldn't be just people who are in a miserable state that want to improve their appreciation of life, their richness
Mm-hmm.
of life experience.
For those that are fortunate enough to do so, at times people can get away from the regular day-to-day, sometimes be in a place maybe like nature where they start to notice things that they aren't noticing in their day-to-day fast, busy lives.
Yeah.
When you're on retreat, you notice things in a different way. Things start to slow down. Can you talk a little bit about the process your mind goes through from when you start and then when you start to get maybe a few days in? What exactly is happening with your mind?
Sure. And I would say that is something that happens. It's a base level that you're increasing so that there starts to be less and less distinction between being on retreat and being off retreat. And the experience that I had on that first retreat is my new normal. So it's an acclimatization based on an increase in your base level of these attention skills that I described. So if we go back to those, concentration, we talked about the ability to focus on what you choose. So you might think that means that, oh, wow, you get to a point where you can always, anytime you want, focus on what you choose and it's super easy. And actually that's not necessarily, I'm here to tell you, as someone who has a highly distractible mind and that's always been kind of a challenge of mine, it absolutely improves, radically improves. However, I've often been stunned at kind of how imperfect my ability to focus my attention where I choose is relative to how much benefit I've gotten out of practice. So, but what I will say is that your ability to focus on what you choose does improve to a point where you really do have say over your distractibility. So I don't want to underplay how much I've gained from that, but I just also want to point out that you still can get lost in thought and preoccupied and what have you. It's not like that goes away. It's just that you have this facility now with your attention. And when you can kind of harness your attention to throw it into whatever it is you're focusing on, so leverage your attention to focus on what you choose. You can think about how much enjoyment we get out of our hobbies. That, why do we do these hobbies? We get absorbed in them. We lose ourselves in them. Time goes away, right? We just love our hobbies. So your attention becomes more and more, you appreciate more and more of your life in the same way that you appreciate your hobby. What you enjoy about your hobby is transferable to the rest of your experience by way of this skill development. So concentration being one of the skills. There's a richness in your experience. You're seeing experience, you're literally, you might see a more vibrant world. The world, as I look at it now, is more vibrant than it was 20 years ago. So that's not the way your sight should go, right? Your sight should be declining over the years. Even though you might need glasses, nevertheless, that vibrance can heighten. So we can have a richer experience, like a chef with a refined palate. We can have a richer, more fulfilling experience of whatever is happening. And of course, we talk a lot about, having enough time to spend with the people we love. But what about if we're spending that time with the people we love and we're distracted and we're missing these wonderful details about those people we love? Like we're not fully appreciating the people we're with. So the quality of our time is possibly more important than the amount of time we have. So our ability to really appreciate the subtleties and the richness of experience, that's the sensory clarity element. And then the equanimity, our sense of ease of being, the harmoniousness, the way life unfolds, the magic of how life unfolds, we get to participate in that more and more fully and completely. And you can think about that as equanimity. Also the friction, I like to talk about equanimity as a frictionless way to be. In other words, all these little micro tensions that we hold in our mind and body, these ideas that we're stuck on, or the emotions that, we're caught up in, or the tensions that we hold in our body, that creates a kind of a friction in our sensory system. If our sensory system was a machine, then it lowers our ability to run smoothly and to output efficiently, right? But when we have equanimity, when we strengthen our ability to allow our emotions to move freely inside the body, allow these tensions to come and go, right, without getting caught up in them, allow these thoughts in the mind to come and go. When we practice that, we're reducing the friction in our sensory system. That allows our sensory system to run more fluidly and efficiently, and to have more energy output. So frees up our energy. So these are all ways that we improve over time as a result of doing this practice. And it's a base level. In other words, what's your resting state? That's why it's a practice, because your resting state keeps going up over time. And unlike, you can work out and improve your strength over time, but ultimately you're faced with aging. With mindfulness practice, that doesn't necessarily have to be a problem. So it's the one way you can really look forward to aging.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many great nuggets of what you just said. One thing that stuck in my mind is appreciation for the present moment. It got me thinking a little bit about how things can change in a blink of an eye. You and I were talking about what was happening in February, and that it wasn't that long ago, but it seems like it was. And then in the blink of an eye, all of our lives changed around the world. It feels surreal in many ways to many of us, if not all of us. And it reminds us that life is impermanent. And, I'm going to ask you a couple of personal questions. You lost your mom a couple of 2 or 3 years ago, I think.
7 years ago.
7 years ago. I'm sorry. There's a beautiful quote that I read that you said, which is, when my mom died, what was born in me was a level of gratitude that has never gone away. It was as if she gifted me gratitude. It was something she gave me in her passing. And I was moved by that quote that you said. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about that. And you've gone through a very difficult situation during this COVID pandemic, where you lost your father as well, somebody that you spoke to regularly on the phone, daily, I think you said. How has your practice and how has all this training helped you?
Yeah, those are deep questions. So yes, I think that culturally we are frightened of death. It's sort of the ultimate indication that we really never had any control, the control we imagined we did to begin with. And I think that that's tragic. That's really unfortunate, the relationship that our culture has to death, because it is one of the two big events of our life, being born and the dying. And certainly, you know, when the living through the loss of a loved one is a major event, and the idea that we would get so caught in our suffering around it that we couldn't appreciate the opportunity in it, to me, is tragic. So I felt lucky that when my mom was diagnosed, and through the 2.5-year battle with ovarian cancer, which she ultimately died from, from the moment we got that news, you know, we were very close, and it was excruciating. I was knocked flat by the pain of it. And I had this resource at my disposal that came to my rescue in the deepest sense, in the sense that I didn't need to shut off from it. I didn't need to try to stop it. I didn't need to try to numb myself. I didn't go crazy from it. You know, it didn't plunge me into depression, which it could easily have done at another time in my life. And instead, I kept growing from it. I kept growing from living through the experience of what she was living through. I was able to be there for her. And it was horrible to bear witness to my mom's suffering. That's the hardest part, I think, about losing someone, is bearing witness to their suffering. But it was wonderful to be able to have a resource that I could rely on, so that I could take care of myself and also be present for her and what she needed during that time. So, and at the end of her life, the culmination was really just an endless restatement of our love for each other. And she would repeat, "We're so lucky. We're so lucky. We're so lucky. We're so lucky." She herself, at the end of her life, was really contacting her own immense gratitude for the bounty of her life and the bounty of loving that she was experiencing. And that was the theme that I carried with me after her passing, and that reverberated for me. As you know, we talk about the will, what's being left, but I think often what's left is really the intangible, or the most important thing that's being left is the intangible, the particular ways loving revealed itself through that unique human being. That's what they're leaving behind. And in that case, you know, that theme of gratitude, which I had never really had access to when I was younger, because I was too caught up in my suffering. I couldn't even understand what, you know, I thought gratitude was an overlay of people avoiding their true pain, because certainly everybody must be in as much suffering as I was in. So, you know, by the time Mom passed, I had a momentum. This base level of my skillfulness had increased to the point where I could actually open up to the experience, the pain of it, and I could actually then fully experience the richness of that gratitude that she was calling me to recognize and appreciate. So that was my mom, and my dad and I weathered that storm together. And literally it was in the middle of Hurricane Sandy. So all of the lights went out, all of the electricity went out, and we were caretaking her. Fortunately, she was able to be at home. So we were caretaking her at home. And then at the beginning of the lockdown, not long into it, Dad was diagnosed with COVID, and was in New Jersey. And so it was right at the spike of the New York, New Jersey COVID experience. And it meant that
everything was overrun. The hospitals were overrun. So he got to the hospital, they saw the COVID pneumonia in his lungs, and then his doctor basically said, we can't keep him here. He was in a converted lounge because they had no beds, and he wasn't needing to be on a ventilator. So therefore they wanted to get rid of him. They wanted to make space for others. But they were panicked. And anytime you could manage to get a hold of anyone, there was a kind of a mass overwhelm that you could hear, where the systems were just completely overwhelmed, and you could hear it in people's voices, and you could hear it in the way they were navigating their daily life. I have no doubt that his doctor was, running 18-hour days every day. So next step was he went to a rehab place, which was overrun because they accepted COVID patients. And they would send us texts every day to tell us how many people were sick or dying, whether that was caregivers or people who were there from the hospital. And at that point, he gathered all his strength and said, get me out of here, because he really, was not having a good experience. And of course, we were unable to see him. We weren't allowed to go visit him. And he didn't want us near. He was very clear about not having us anywhere near him. So we would get these snippets, these 2-minute snippets of talking to him when he could barely talk, and trying to get a hold of the nurses station and not reaching anyone because they were totally overwhelmed. So we got a window into what other families were living through at that time. And what, we run the risk as a country of continuing to live through in different parts of the country because of the way this virus is spreading. So finally, then the residents didn't want him back because they were afraid that he would infect other people. And so we managed to get him back there. And then he was very clear about not wanting us near until finally one day and he was kind of increasingly weak. He just said, when are you coming? And I said, I'll get on a plane tonight, Dad. And he said, great. And so I did. So I got on a plane, I got over there, and, of course there's a lot of uncertainty because, we still know so little about this virus. I mean, I think that's the tragic thing, is people have a hard time understanding that science works at a snail's pace, and it's just impossible to know what exactly this is all about, this coronavirus. So we didn't know whether he would still be shedding the virus at 5 weeks or not. So going there meant that, and the rest of my family was not in a position to take the kind of risk that I could take. So I went there not knowing whether I would be exposing myself to coronavirus. And I spent the last week with him, and it was extraordinary. I was very, very glad to be there. I could help guide his care. He had excellent care, which we were very lucky about. And I could help guide that and be there by his side. And fortunately, we were the lucky ones. We got to be there. I got to be there at his bedside when he passed, and I got to help everybody in the family spend some time with him through, the iPad and through seeing him. And that really makes a difference for closure. So my practice was there with me alongside all the way, all the uncertainties that you face. When it seemed like I was not going to be able to be with him, I was focusing on the way I could lovingly connect with him without being in his physical presence. When I was able to be in his physical presence, I was focusing on all the forms of loving connection that can happen when you're able to be in proximity with the person you love. And so to be able to shift the focus to that, again, if we think about our priorities, right? We can get caught up in the ways we're separate. We can get caught up in the fact that I can't be near him. I can't do this. I can't do that. Why aren't they letting me do this? Why can't I do it this way? We can get caught up in that, in which case we suffer. Or we can redirect our focus to the ways that we're able to tap into our reserves of a loving connection. And so I would say that that's a practice, and our ability to do that depends on these attention skills. And so you develop these attention skills and you get better at knowing how to prioritize your focus, direct your focus to in meaningful ways that can reduce your suffering, and that it can increase your sense of empowerment, your sense of fulfillment, being able to be there for the people you love in the ways that you're able to, given the constraints of the situation.
Thank you for sharing that. That was really beautiful. And it shows how a practice can show up, and, you know, it might not have the same quality in our normal lives each day as we go through. But when we have these significant situations happen, it's there for us to draw on.
Yeah, you know, I'll say that I was someone, you know, and again, I don't want to generalize my particular track, because it's going to be different for everyone. Mm-hmm. I was someone who really struggled with doubt a lot. I was very skeptical. And unfortunately, that skepticism caused me to suffer an awful lot because I was really very dedicated to it and rigid about it. And so even as I was going deep in this practice, I was constantly looking for clues that I was, you know, bullshitting myself. I don't know if I can say that on your,
you can.
But yeah. So I was constantly looking for clues that maybe it wasn't as good as I thought it was, or maybe it was just temporary, and I was constantly doubting that it was the efficacy of it, even as I was saying, but it's the only thing I have to do, so I'm going to do it. Right. So I'd go on these retreats, and then it would seem to wear off, and I'd say, oh, well, see, look, there's the proof. This is just bullshit, and I'm wasting my time. And then I'd go back on retreat because it was the only thing that I knew that would help me. So when my mom got sick, that, and then passed, that, living through that, ended my my identification with those doubts, and that quieted those doubts. Ultimately, I stopped giving so much weight to the voice in my head that said, I don't know if this is really doing anything. I stopped. And I remember vividly the moment I stopped. I was driving home from the Zen center that I would train at, and I thought to myself, yeah, you know, it really doesn't matter anymore whether or not this is bullshit, because it's what I do, and it's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. That's just how it is. So yeah, it was amazing how it just sort of like, it stopped mattering. But the constant debate in my head, is this really doing anything? That just died.
Yeah.
And didn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And once it didn't matter anymore, whether or not, then the debater quieted down amazingly. It's like, oh, I guess that's not working anymore to pull focus. So I'm going to stop that. Yeah.
And it's amazing, you know, I mentioned a little bit earlier about journeys, and here you are, you know, sharing this gift with the world in a really meaningful way. And I know you have, I think you have a course that, or something, if you could talk about it, it's called Core. Is that right?
Yeah. So we have a free training that it's a 10 video series that walks people step by step through how to develop concentration, power, sensory clarity, equanimity, these skills I mentioned, in a very systematic way. And it's free at our site, unifiedmindfulness.com/core. And it's a great program. We also have a nice thread going on it where people kind of talk about their experience of going through the course, and people get tremendous value out of it. And it's something we like to offer as a way so that everybody can have access to these resources. Everybody can have a clear sense of and understand how to do this practice, because it's an essential life skill that we weren't taught as kids. And hopefully one day this will be just part of the curriculum of our education. And certainly as parents, you can learn it and share it with your kids, but even just for yourself, you know, for me personally, I know where I would be, especially now having just lost my dad and being trapped by myself in a, you know, in lockdown in the middle of a spike in LA, you know, and grieving, you know, I know what I cannot imagine what that former self would have been going through actually at this moment. I just know that she would have been in profound suffering. And comparatively, while I do suffer the loss, it's just a totally different experience, just radically different. The experience of grieving with momentum of this practice, even as excruciating as it is, even as it knocks me flat, it still knocks me flat. It's extraordinary and poignant and beautiful and rich, and I can feel myself growing through it, and I welcome it. I appreciate it as an essential gift of life that we get to grieve the loss. It's a gift that we get to grieve. It's an indication of our love, our capacity for loving, that we get to grieve. And so to be able to know that, not just intellectually, but know that as a whole body experience, I just never would have imagined what a difference that could make in how I walk around in the world, how I experience the world, and what life is like.
It's beautiful. I saw recently, I think it was a picture, you had made you had a handkerchief of some sort, you made a mask out of it, and the meaning of the mask, or what was on the mask, was everything is beautiful. This moment is everything. And that's how I feel right now with you.
Noritake Roshi. Yes, that is a quote from Noritake Roshi. And I've had the good fortune to train with him, and I honor my teachers because this moment is beautiful. And this moment is everything, because my teachers graciously helped me to discover the truth of that. And now, to the best of my ability, I pay that forward.
You sure do. Thank you for joining me today, Julianna. It was such a pleasure and an honor to have you here.
Likewise, Rob, this was really wonderful. Thank you so much.
And to all the listeners, I greatly appreciate you spending time with us today. And I wish you all much love and gratitude.